There's something deeply tragic about being born to save the world. In both Adventure Time and Steven Universe, we watch young heroes carry weights that would crush most adults. Finn Mertens and Steven Universe didn't choose their destinies. They inherited them, along with all the trauma, responsibility, and impossible choices that come with being the one everyone depends on. Tonight, we're going to explore the true cost of heroism across two animated universes that understood something most stories miss. Saving the world doesn't make you whole. Sometimes it breaks you in ways that never fully heal. Both shows present us with protagonists who seem, on the surface, to embody pure heroism. Finn, the last human in the land of Oo, and Steven, the half-human son of Rose Quartz, begin their journeys with optimism and determination. They want to help people. They want to make things right. But as we follow them through hundreds of episodes, we witness the gradual accumulation of trauma, the erosion of innocence, and the psychological toll of being responsible for everyone's survival. What makes these shows remarkable is their willingness to examine heroism not as a triumph, but as a burden. Traditional hero narratives focus on victory, on the moment of conquest, on the satisfaction of defeating evil. Adventure Time and Steven Universe ask a different question. What happens after? What happens to the person who has to keep saving the world over and over while their own needs go unmet? What happens when you're so busy being everyone's hero that you forget how to be a person? The cost of heroism in these shows manifests in multiple dimensions. There's the physical cost, the actual bodily harm that comes from constantly throwing yourself into danger. There's the emotional cost, the trauma of witnessing death and destruction, of making impossible choices, of carrying guilt for every person you couldn't save. There's the social cost, the isolation that comes from being different, from carrying responsibilities your peers can't understand. And there's the developmental cost, the childhood stolen by apocalyptic stakes, the adolescence spent saving the universe instead of discovering yourself. Finn's story begins in the aftermath of the Mushroom War, a nuclear apocalypse that wiped out most of humanity. He's raised by Jake the dog in a post-apocalyptic wasteland that has been reclaimed by magic and strange new life. From his earliest memories, Finn defines himself through heroism. He's Finn the human, and being the last of his kind gives him a sense of purpose that's also a prison. He must be brave, he must be strong, he must save people. There's no room for weakness, for fear, for the normal struggles of growing up, because he's not just a boy, he's humanity's representative, the last hope of a dead species. Steven's burden is different, but equally crushing. He's not the last of his kind, but he is the only one of his kind. Half human, half gem, he exists in a liminal space between two worlds. More significantly, he carries the legacy of his mother, Rose Quartz, who was actually Pink Diamond, one of the tyrannical rulers of Homeworld. Steven didn't just inherit his mother's powers. He inherited her war, her secrets, her mistakes, and the consequences of her actions. Before he's old enough to understand what it means, he's responsible for cleaning up a mess that's thousands of years old. The parallel between these two heroes becomes clear when we examine their origin stories. Both are defined by absence and legacy. Finn never knew his human parents. He was abandoned as an infant, left to grow up in a world where he's the only one of his kind. This absence creates a void he tries to fill with heroism, with being important, with mattering so much that his origins become irrelevant. Steven never knew his mother either, but her presence haunts him in a different way. Everyone knew Rose Quartz. Everyone loved her, mourned her, idealized her. Steven grows up in her shadow, constantly compared to someone he can never know, expected to be like her while also being himself. Both boys learn early that their value lies in what they can do for others. Finn saves princesses, defeats monsters, and protects the innocent because that's what heroes do. It's his identity, his purpose, his reason for existing. Steven heals corruption, mediates conflicts, and takes responsibility for his mother's mistakes because the crystal gems need him to, because the universe needs him to. Neither child is given the option to simply be a child. Their heroism isn't a choice they made after careful consideration. It's an expectation placed on them before they were old enough to understand what they were accepting. The shows are careful to illustrate how this expectation shapes their psychology from the beginning. Finn's earliest adventures show him desperate to prove himself, to be seen as a real hero. He measures his worth by his accomplishments, by the number of people he's saved, by his reputation. When he fails, when he can't save someone, the guilt consumes him. We see this in his relationship with the Fire Kingdom, with Flame Princess, with every situation where his heroic intervention makes things worse instead of better. Each failure doesn't teach him that heroism has limits. It teaches him that he needs to try harder, be better, sacrifice more. Steven's early episodes show a similar pattern. He's desperate to be useful to the crystal gems, to prove he deserves his mother's gemstone, to show that he's not a burden. He throws himself into dangerous situations because he wants Garnet, Amethyst, and Pearl to see him as a full member of the team, not as a child to be protected. His worth, in his mind, is determined by his contribution to their mission. When he can't summon his shield, when his powers don't work, when he needs to be rescued, he sees himself as failing not just a task, but his entire reason for existing. This is where the cost of heroism begins, not in the dramatic battles or the world-ending threats, but in the quiet, constant pressure to be more than you are, to meet expectations you never agreed to carry responsibilities that should never fall on a child's shoulders. Both Finn and Steven internalize the belief that their value is conditional. They matter because they're useful. They're loved because they save people. And if they stop being heroes, if they prioritize their own needs, if they admit they're hurt or scared or broken, then what are they? The tragedy is that both shows are populated by characters who genuinely love Finn and Steven. Jake loves Finn unconditionally. The Crystal Gems love Steven with everything they have. But love without awareness can still be harmful. The people around these young heroes don't realize how much pressure they're applying, how their dependence is crushing someone who's still figuring out who they are. They see strength and capability, and they lean on it, not understanding that what looks like strength might actually be a child desperately trying to earn the love they're afraid they don't deserve. Adventure Time and Steven Universe both understand that heroism, especially childhood heroism, is often a trauma response. It's a way of controlling an uncontrollable world, of finding purpose in chaos, of earning safety through usefulness. Finn wasn't given the option to grieve his species, to process the apocalypse he was born into, to be angry about his abandonment. He was given a sword and a destiny. Steven wasn't given the option to resent his mother for leaving, to question whether he wanted her responsibilities, to develop his identity separate from her legacy. He was given her gemstone and her war. The cost of being a hero, then, begins long before the physical injuries and the emotional breakdowns. It begins in childhood, in the moment when a young person learns that their safety, their belonging, their worth depends on what they can do for others. It begins when I love you becomes inseparable from I need you. It begins when a child looks at the world's problems and thinks, it's my job to fix this. Not because they're arrogant, but because no one else is stepping up and someone has to. As we move deeper into this exploration, we'll examine specific moments where the cost of heroism becomes unbearable. We'll look at the physical toll, the battles that leave scars, both visible and invisible. We'll explore the emotional devastation of impossible choices, of victories that feel like losses, of saving the world while losing yourself. We'll analyze the isolation that comes from carrying burdens no one else can understand, from being the only one who can fix things, from bearing responsibilities that set you apart from every normal relationship. But for now, let's sit with this foundational understanding. Finn and Steven didn't choose to be heroes. They were shaped into heroes by circumstances beyond their control, by absences that defined them, by expectations that preceded their ability to consent. And everything that follows, all the trauma and sacrifice and cost we're about to explore, flows from this original wound. They were children who needed protection, and instead, they became the protectors. They needed someone to carry them, and instead, they learned to carry the world. Finn the human's heroism begins as play and evolves into prison. In the earliest episodes of Adventure Time, we see a 12-year-old boy running through the land of Oo with infectious enthusiasm, treating danger like adventure and rescue missions like games. He has a sword, a best friend, and an unshakable belief that doing good feels good. The world is simple. There are heroes and villains, right and wrong, people who need saving and people who do the saving. Finn is the hero, and being the hero is awesome. But Adventure Time is a show that grows up alongside its protagonist, and as Finn ages, the show carefully deconstructs the heroic identity he's built his entire personality around. We watch heroism transform from a source of joy into a source of suffering, from an identity freely chosen into a cage Finn can't escape. The cost of being Finn the human, the legendary hero of Oo, becomes clearer with each passing season, each failed relationship, each moment when doing the right thing leads to disaster. One of the earliest cracks in Finn's heroic facade appears in his relationship with Flame Princess. Here is a boy who has built his identity around saving princesses, who sees rescue as the foundation of romantic connection. He meets Flame Princess and immediately falls into familiar patterns. She's in distress, he'll save her, they'll fall in love. Except Flame Princess doesn't need saving. She needs understanding, space to be herself, freedom from control. Finn's heroic instincts, his need to fix and protect and manage, become the very things that destroy their relationship. The episode Frost and Fire represents a crucial turning point in Finn's understanding of heroism's cost. Manipulating Flame Princess and Ice King into fighting so he can understand his prophetic dreams, Finn causes genuine harm while telling himself he's solving a problem. When Flame Princess discovers his manipulation, she doesn't see a hero making a difficult choice. She sees a boyfriend who used her, who prioritized his own needs over her autonomy, who treated her like a problem to solve rather than a person to respect. The heroic mindset that served Finn well in battle becomes toxic in relationships. This pattern repeats throughout Finn's romantic life. With Princess Bubblegum, his heroism manifests as an inability to accept rejection, a persistent belief that if he just saves her enough times, proves himself worthy enough, she'll eventually love him back. He can't separate his value as a person from his value as a hero, so romantic rejection feels like a negation of his entire identity. When Princess Bubblegum chooses to not reciprocate his feelings, Finn doesn't just feel heartbroken, he feels like he's failed at being himself. The physical cost of Finn's heroism becomes impossible to ignore as the series progresses. In Escape from the Citadel, Finn loses his arm protecting others from the Lich. This isn't a temporary injury or a battle scar that makes him look cool. It's a permanent disability, a constant reminder that heroism demands pieces of yourself you can't get back. The show doesn't shy away from the psychological impact of this loss. Finn struggles with prosthetics, with feeling incomplete, with the gap between the invincible hero he's supposed to be and the injured teenager he actually is. What makes this particularly devastating is that Finn doesn't receive the support he needs to process this trauma. Jake tries to help, but he doesn't fully understand. The people of Ooo still need a hero, and Finn's injury doesn't exempt him from that role. So he adapts, gets a grass sword that eventually becomes a grass arm, and continues throwing himself into danger. The message is clear. Even when heroism costs you a limb, you're still expected to keep being a hero. Your pain is secondary to everyone else's need for protection. The episode The Tower gives us a rare glimpse into Finn's psychological state after losing his arm. He builds a tower toward space, toward his absent father, driven by rage and pain he can't fully articulate. This is a child processing trauma through the only framework he knows: action, building, doing. He can't sit with his feelings, can't admit he's hurt and scared and angry, because heroes don't do that. Heroes solve problems. So Finn turns his emotional devastation into a construction project, literally trying to build his way out of pain. His relationship with his father, Martin, reveals another dimension of heroism's cost. Finn has spent his entire life wondering about his origins, building fantasies about his human heritage, imagining a father who would explain everything and make him feel complete. When he finally finds Martin, he discovers a selfish, cowardly man who abandoned him without hesitation and feels no remorse. The fantasy that sustained Finn through years of being the only human collapses. His father isn't a hero. His father is barely a person. This revelation could break someone, and in many ways it does break Finn. But because he's been conditioned to process pain through heroism, he can't simply grieve. He can't admit that he's devastated, that meeting his father destroyed something fundamental in his identity. Instead, he doubles down on being a hero, on proving that he's nothing like Martin, on earning worth through action, since he can't claim it through heritage. The trauma of parental abandonment gets channeled into more heroism, more self-sacrifice, more proof that Finn the human matters. The relationship between Finn and Martin also illuminates how heroism can be a defense against feeling unwanted. If Finn is important enough, heroic enough, necessary enough, then maybe his abandonment doesn't mean he was unlovable. Maybe his father didn't leave because Finn wasn't worth staying for. Maybe it was just Martin's cowardice. Heroism becomes armor against the most painful question: why wasn't I enough? As long as Finn is saving the world, he doesn't have to confront the possibility that his own father didn't think he was worth staying for. As Finn enters adolescence, the show begins exploring how heroism interferes with identity development. Teenagers are supposed to experiment, make mistakes, figure out who they are, separate from who they're expected to be. But Finn can't do that. He's Finn the human, legendary hero of Ooo. Every choice he makes is public. Every mistake is a failure of heroism. Every moment of confusion or doubt is a crack in the facade everyone depends on. He can't be a normal teenager because normal teenagers aren't responsible for everyone's safety. The episode Breezy shows us Finn at his lowest point, trying to lose himself in shallow relationships after losing his arm and his sense of heroic invincibility. He's seeking comfort, connection, something to make him feel whole again. But even his attempts at normalcy, at being a regular teenager with regular problems, get filtered through his heroic identity. Breezy sees him as a tragic hero in need of healing, not as a person with complex needs. Even when Finn tries to step away from heroism, the world won't let him. His friendship with Jake, while genuine and loving, also reveals the cost of heroism. Jake is Finn's best friend, his brother, his most consistent source of support. But Jake also enables Finn's heroic self-destruction. When Finn wants to throw himself into danger, Jake comes along. When Finn defines his worth through heroic deeds, Jake validates that framework. Jake loves Finn unconditionally, but he doesn't challenge the fundamental belief system that's slowly destroying his brother. He doesn't say, maybe you don't have to be the hero right now. Maybe you can just be Finn. The introduction of Fern, Finn's grass clone, creates a devastating mirror for examining heroic identity. Fern is literally Finn, but he's the version of Finn who doesn't have the heroic reputation, who isn't universally loved and celebrated, who exists in the original's shadow. Fern's psychological deterioration shows us what happens when you have all of Finn's heroic instincts and traumas, but none of the validation. He's proof that the heroic identity Finn has built is fragile, dependent on external recognition, vulnerable to collapse when the world stops reinforcing it. Fern's jealousy and eventual corruption aren't just about being a copy. They're about the impossibility of the heroic standard Finn represents. Fern can't live up to Finn the human, because no one can, not even Finn himself. The heroic identity is a performance that requires constant validation, and when that validation disappears, the whole structure crumbles. Fern is what Finn fears becoming. Someone who tried to be a hero and failed. Someone whose worth was conditional and whose conditions weren't met. The most subtle cost of Finn's heroism is the loss of choice. By the time he's old enough to question whether he wants to be a hero, it's too late. Everyone knows him as Finn the human. His reputation precedes him. Entire kingdoms depend on him. He's been doing this since he was 12, and now he's a teenager who's never known any other identity. How do you step away from heroism when it's the only thing you've ever been? How do you admit you're tired when everyone's counting on you? How do you say, I don't want to do this anymore, when people will die if you stop? This is perhaps the cruelest cost, the loss of the ability to refuse. Finn's heroism started as a choice, maybe even a joyful one, but through years of reinforcement, expectation, and dependence, it became an obligation he can't escape. The people of Oo need a hero. Finn is that hero. Therefore, Finn must continue being that hero, regardless of what it costs him personally. His agency was stolen so gradually, he didn't notice until it was gone. Steven Universe's burden is inheritance. Where Finn had to build his heroic identity from scratch in a post-apocalyptic wasteland, Steven was born into a role that was waiting for him before he took his first breath. His mother, Rose Quartz, who was secretly Pink Diamond, left behind a war, a rebellion, countless corrupted gems, and a son who would have to deal with all of it. Steven didn't choose to be half gem. He didn't choose to have his mother's gemstone embedded in his body. He didn't choose to be responsible for ending a conflict that had raged for thousands of years. He was simply born, and with that birth came obligations that would define and eventually nearly destroy him. The early seasons of Steven Universe present us with a child desperate to prove himself worthy of his inheritance. Steven knows his mother was important, that the crystal gems loved her, that she gave up her physical form to create him. This knowledge creates an impossible standard. He must be worth it. His existence cost Rose Quartz her life, so he must justify that sacrifice through his actions, his usefulness, his ability to be like her. Every time Steven heals a corrupted gem, solves a problem, or helps the crystal gems, he's trying to prove that Rose made the right choice in becoming him. This dynamic is most visible in his relationship with the crystal gems themselves. Garnet, amethyst, and pearl love Steven genuinely and deeply. But their love is complicated by grief, by their relationship with Rose, by their own unprocessed trauma. Pearl especially struggles to separate Steven from Rose, often seeing him as a continuation of the gem she loved rather than his own person. When Steven succeeds, Pearl sees Rose's goodness living on. When Steven struggles, Pearl mourns Rose's absence. Steven learns early that his value to the people who raised him is partially tied to how much he reminds them of someone else. The revelation that Rose was actually Pink Diamond fundamentally restructures Steven's understanding of his burden. It's not just that he inherited a war. He inherited a war his mother started through her own immaturity and deception. Pink Diamond faked her own shattering, abandoned her responsibilities, started a rebellion against herself, and left the consequences for Steven to clean up. Every corrupted gem, every traumatized survivor, every broken relationship across homeworld and Earth traces back to Pink's actions, and Steven, by virtue of having her gemstone, becomes responsible for fixing what she broke. This is a cost Finn never faces: the weight of someone else's mistakes. Finn's heroism is reactive, responding to threats and protecting the innocent. Steven's heroism is restorative, trying to heal damage he didn't cause, apologizing for actions he didn't take, bearing responsibility for a person he never knew. He can't simply fight the bad guys because the bad guys were hurt by his mother. He can't simply protect Earth because Earth was endangered by his mother's choices. Every heroic act is also an apology, an attempt to make amends for someone else's sins. The physical manifestation of this burden is Steven's gemstone itself. It's not just a source of power, it's literally his mother, or what remains of her, embedded in his body. He can't separate himself from her legacy, because her legacy is physically part of him. When gems look at Steven, many of them see Pink Diamond's gemstone and react to her, not to him. He's haunted by his mother in the most literal way possible, carrying her inside himself, unable to escape her shadow because her shadow is cast from within his own body. The episode Storm in the Room gives us devastating insight into Steven's psychological state regarding his mother. Creating a version of Rose from his own mind, Steven finally articulates the anger and confusion he's been carrying. He asks the questions he can't ask the real Rose. Did you ever think about what would happen to me? Did you care about the consequences of your choices? Did you create me because you loved me, or because you were running away from your responsibilities? The room Rose can't give him real answers because Steven doesn't have real answers. He's left with uncertainty, with the possibility that his entire existence was just another one of Pink Diamond's impulsive decisions. This uncertainty is its own cost. Finn knows he was abandoned, and while that's painful, it's clear. Steven doesn't know if he was wanted or if he was an escape plan. He doesn't know if Rose became Steven because she loved humanity and wanted to experience it fully, or because she was tired of being Pink Diamond and saw creating a child as a way out. This ambiguity makes it impossible for Steven to simply grieve. He can't mourn his mother cleanly because he doesn't know who she really was or what she really wanted. The cost of Steven's heroism manifests differently than Finn's because Steven's power is healing, not fighting. His signature ability is to fix what's broken, to restore what's corrupted, to bring people back from the edge. This sounds beautiful until you realize what it means. Steven can't ignore suffering. When he sees someone in pain, someone corrupted, someone broken, he has the ability to help, which means he has the responsibility to help. His power makes him responsible for everyone's healing, even when he's the one who needs to be healed. This becomes clearest in his approach to the diamonds. Yellow diamond, blue diamond, and white diamond are tyrants who have caused immeasurable suffering across the universe. They're responsible for shattering countless gems, for the corruption of Earth's gems, for maintaining a rigid caste system that denies individual identity. By any reasonable standard, they're villains who deserve consequences. But Steven can't approach them as villains because they're his family, because they're grieving Pink, because he has the ability to heal their pain. So he takes on the burden of redeeming them, of helping them change, of processing their grief and guiding their growth. This is where Steven's heroism becomes self-destruction. He's not just responsible for fixing his mother's mistakes. He's responsible for healing the people his mother hurt, including the abusive family members who hurt her. He becomes a therapist to tyrants, carrying their emotional burdens while processing his own trauma. The diamonds don't have to do the work of redemption themselves because Steven does it for them. He makes himself responsible for their growth, their healing, their transformation from oppressors to something resembling decent people. The cost of this approach becomes evident in Steven Universe Future, where we see the delayed consequences of a childhood spent healing everyone except himself. Steven develops PTSD, anxiety, and a host of trauma responses because he never processed any of the terrifying things he experienced. He was too busy making sure everyone else was okay. He was too busy being his mother's redemption, the crystal gem's hope, the diamond's therapist, and the universe's mediator. There was no time, no space, no permission for Steven to simply be a traumatized child who needed help. His relationship with Connie illustrates another cost of heroism: the inability to maintain healthy relationships when you see yourself as everyone's savior. Steven wants to protect Connie, keep her safe, shield her from danger. But Connie wants to be his partner, his equal, someone who fights alongside him. Steven's heroic conditioning makes it nearly impossible for him to accept help, to be vulnerable, to let someone else share his burdens. He's been trained since birth to be the one who helps, and accepting help feels like failure. The episode Growing Pains reveals the physical cost of Steven's heroism in devastating detail. His body is breaking down from years of stress and trauma. His gem powers are activating defensively, turning him pink when he feels threatened, because his nervous system can't distinguish between actual danger and emotional distress. A doctor tells him his body is exhibiting signs of someone who's been through multiple near-death experiences, because he has. Steven has been fighting for his life and everyone else's lives since he was a child, and his body has been keeping score. What makes Steven's situation particularly tragic is that his heroism was never supposed to be his burden. Rose created Steven, according to her video message, so he could be himself, be free, live a life she couldn't have. But the circumstances of his birth, the legacy she left behind, and the ongoing consequences of her actions made it impossible for Steven to simply be himself. He was born into a war zone and handed the tools to fix it. The freedom Rose wanted for him was stolen by the very act of creating him with her gemstone. Steven's healing powers also create a unique psychological burden. Every time he heals someone, he's succeeding where his mother failed. Rose couldn't heal corruption. Steven can. Rose couldn't make peace with the diamonds. Steven did. In succeeding where she failed, Steven proves that he's better than her, more capable, more worthy. But this success comes at a price. He can never rest, never stop, never be merely good enough. If he can heal corruption, then every corrupted gem he doesn't heal is his failure. If he can redeem the diamonds, then every conflict he doesn't resolve is his responsibility. The show carefully illustrates how Steven's empathy, his greatest strength, becomes a weapon against himself. He feels everyone's pain so deeply that he can't prioritize his own. When Lapis is suffering, Steven feels it. When Peridot is scared, Steven feels it. When the diamonds are grieving, Steven feels it. His emotional boundaries are so porous that he absorbs everyone's trauma while having no container for his own. This isn't just kindness. It's a defense mechanism, a way of controlling situations through emotional labor, and it's destroying him from the inside. By the time we reach Steven Universe Future, we see a young man who has saved the universe and lost himself in the process. He's accomplished everything a hero is supposed to accomplish. He ended the war, healed the corrupted gems, reformed the diamonds, and created peace between Earth and Homeworld. He succeeded at heroism in ways most heroes never do. And his reward for all this success is PTSD, emotional breakdown, and the realization that he doesn't know who he is outside of being everyone's savior. The cost of being Steven Universe, of being Rose Quartz's son, of being the hero who fixed everything, is Steven himself. The physical toll of heroism is measured in scars, broken bones, and bodies that remember trauma long after the mind tries to forget. Both Finn and Steven inhabit bodies that have been used as weapons, shields, and tools for others' protection. They've been stabbed, burned, corrupted, shattered, and broken in ways that leave permanent marks. But the shows go deeper than simple battle damage. They explore how chronic danger affects development, how the expectation of self-sacrifice shapes relationship with your own body, and how physical trauma becomes inseparable from identity when you're a child hero. Finn's body tells the story of his heroism in ways that become impossible to ignore as the series progresses. The loss of his arm in Escape from the Citadel is the most obvious example, a permanent disability that fundamentally changes how he moves through the world. But before that loss, we see countless smaller injuries. Bruises, cuts, burns, broken bones. These aren't treated as serious because they heal, because Finn bounces back, because heroes don't let injuries slow them down. The message is clear. Your body is expendable in service of heroism. What makes Finn's arm loss particularly significant is how it's framed. He doesn't lose his arm in a heroic sacrifice that saves the world. He loses it reaching for his father, trying to prevent Martin from escaping, clinging to a relationship that was never going to give him what he needed. The injury is heroic in mechanism. He's protecting others from the Lich, but it's rooted in personal need, in a child's desperate desire for parental connection. His body pays the price for both his heroism and his unmet needs, and the show never lets us separate the two. The grass sword, and later the grass arm, represents Finn's complicated relationship with his injured body. The grass sword was always dangerous, always had the potential to take over, but Finn used it anyway because he needed the power, needed to be effective, needed to compensate for perceived weakness. When it becomes a replacement arm, it seems like a solution. Finn is whole again, capable again, heroic again, but the grass arm isn't really his. It's a foreign entity inhabiting his body, and it eventually becomes Fern, a separate being with his own consciousness. Finn's attempt to fix his body through heroic means literally creates a new person who will suffer because of that choice. This raises disturbing questions about bodily autonomy in the context of heroism. Did Finn choose the grass sword initially, or did he feel he had no choice because heroes need to be armed? Did he consent to it becoming his arm, or did it happen to him? When your body is a tool for saving others, when your physical capability determines your worth, how much choice do you really have about what you do to yourself? Finn's relationship with his body is transactional. It must perform heroic functions, and if it can't, it must be modified until it can. Steven's physical trauma is even more disturbing because it's inseparable from his very existence. His gemstone isn't an accessory or a power source. It's part of his body, as integral as his heart or brain. When Jasper cracks his gemstone, he's not just injured. He's dying in a way that's unique to his hybrid nature. The cracks spread across his face and body, physical manifestations of damage to the gem component of his being. His humanity and his gem nature are so intertwined that injury to one affects the other, creating vulnerabilities that neither fully human nor fully gem beings experience. The episode Change Your Mind features one of the most traumatic sequences in either show. White Diamond removes Steven's gemstone, attempting to extract rose quartz and pink diamond from inside him. This isn't just an injury. It's a violation of Steven's bodily integrity at the most fundamental level. White Diamond literally rips out what she perceives as his core identity, expecting to find pink diamond underneath. Instead, she finds that Steven is Steven, that his gemstone generates a Steven-shaped gem being, that there is no rose hiding inside him. But the process of proving this nearly kills him, separates him from half of himself, and forces him to experience his own existence as something that can be torn apart. This scene reveals the unique horror of Steven's physical existence. His body isn't entirely his own. Part of it belonged to his mother, part of it is coveted by the diamonds, part of it is seen as a resource by various factions. People don't just threaten Steven's body the way they threaten Finn's. They claim ownership of it, assert rights to it, treat it as something they're entitled to access. His bodily autonomy is compromised by his very nature as Pink Diamond's son, as the bearer of her gemstone, as the bridge between human and gem. The physical cost of Steven's empathy manifests in his shape-shifting abilities and their psychological triggers. When Steven is stressed, afraid, or emotionally overwhelmed, his body changes without his conscious control. He ages rapidly, turns pink, swells in size, or loses cohesion. His body becomes a mirror of his emotional state, removing the ability to hide pain, to pretend he's okay, to maintain the composure heroism demands. This is both a vulnerability and a cost. Steven can't compartmentalize his trauma because his body won't let him. In Steven Universe Future, we see the delayed physical consequences of a childhood spent in constant danger. Steven's powers activate defensively, treating emotional stress as physical threat. When he feels cornered in a conversation, his body reacts as if he's being attacked. His nervous system can't distinguish between actual danger and interpersonal conflict, because for most of his life, those things were the same. Every argument was potentially life-threatening. Every confrontation could escalate to violence. His body learned to be ready for battle at all times, and now it can't unlearn that readiness. The most devastating physical manifestation of Steven's trauma is his transformation into a giant monster. This isn't a villain controlling him, or a corruption attacking him. It's his own pain, his own trauma, his own sense of being monstrous, manifesting as physical transformation. His body becomes the shape of how he feels inside. Huge, destructive, out of control, dangerous to everyone he loves. The metaphor is uncomfortably literal. Steven's internalized belief that he's a monster, that he's damaged beyond repair, that he's dangerous, becomes physically true. Both Finn and Steven experience their bodies as battlegrounds long before they're old enough to consent to that use. Finn is training for combat as a young child, conditioning his body for violence, building muscle memory for fighting. Steven is discovering his powers through life-threatening situations, learning what his body can do by being forced into circumstances where he must use those abilities or die. Neither child gets a grace period of physical safety, a time when their body is just a body and not a weapon or a tool. The shows also explore how physical capability becomes tied to self-worth. When Finn loses his arm, he doesn't just grieve the limb, he grieves his heroic capability, his completeness, his ability to fulfill his role. When Steven's powers don't work, when he can't summon his shield or his bubble, he experiences it as personal failure. Their bodies aren't allowed to have limitations, to be weak, to need rest. Physical capability equals worth, so physical limitation equals worthlessness. This creates a disturbing relationship with pain. Both Finn and Steven learn to push through injuries, to fight while hurt, to prioritize others' safety over their own physical well-being. Pain becomes something to ignore, to overcome, to prove you're strong enough to handle. Admitting you're hurt, asking for help, stopping to heal, these become signs of weakness rather than reasonable responses to injury. The heroic ideal demands that you sacrifice your body without complaint, and both boys internalize this demand. The long-term consequences of this physical trauma are significant. Bodies remember what minds try to forget. Injuries create compensatory movement patterns. Chronic stress affects development, immune function, cardiovascular health. Both Finn and Steven are experiencing this trauma during crucial developmental periods when their bodies and brains are still forming. The physical cost of heroism isn't just the injuries themselves. It's how those injuries shape the body's growth, how chronic danger affects maturation, how the expectation of physical sacrifice becomes embedded in muscle memory and nervous system response. Perhaps most tragically, both characters lose the ability to experience their bodies as sources of pleasure, comfort, or safety. A body that must always be ready for battle can't fully relax. A body that's constantly used as a tool can't be experienced as simply yours. Finn and Steven don't get to enjoy their physicality, to experience the simple pleasure of a body that's strong and capable. Instead, that strength and capability are immediately conscripted for heroic purposes, turning potential joy into obligation. The isolation of heroism is perhaps its most insidious cost. Both Finn and Steven are surrounded by people who love them, yet they remain fundamentally alone in ways that compound their trauma. This isn't the dramatic isolation of being physically separated from others. It's the subtle, crushing loneliness of being the only one who carries certain burdens, the only one who can fix certain problems, the only one who understands what it means to be responsible for everyone's survival. It's the isolation that comes from being needed so much that you can never be known. Finn's isolation begins with his identity as the last human. Even before he knows about the Mushroom War or understands what happened to humanity, he's aware that he's different. He's the only one of his kind in the land of Oo, surrounded by candy people, magic users, and various other entities, but never another human. This fundamental difference creates a barrier that even the deepest friendships can't fully cross. Jake loves Finn completely, but Jake will never understand what it means to be the last of your species, to carry the weight of representing an entire extinct civilization. The loneliness of being the last human manifests in Finn's desperate attempts to connect with anything human. When he meets Susan Strong and believes she might be human, his reaction is intense and immediate. Here, finally, might be someone who understands, someone who shares his nature, someone who can relate to the specific isolation of being human in a post-human world. The possibility that Susan might not actually be human, or might be human but so changed that she doesn't remember humanity, only deepens Finn's isolation. Even when he finds other humans, they can't give him what he needs because they don't share his experiences. This isolation is compounded by Finn's heroic role. As the legendary hero of Ooo, he's simultaneously the most connected and most alone person in the land. Everyone knows him. Everyone has expectations of him. Everyone wants something from him. But these connections are fundamentally unequal. People know Finn the hero, not Finn the person. They know what he can do for them, not who he is when he's scared or confused or broken. The more famous he becomes, the more isolated he feels, because fame creates distance even as it creates connection. Finn's relationships, even his closest ones, are structured by his heroic identity in ways that prevent true intimacy. Jake is his best friend, but Jake also enables and participates in Finn's heroic adventures. Princess Bubblegum values him, but partially for his usefulness to the Candy Kingdom. Flame Princess is attracted to his heroism before she knows him as a person. Even in his most intimate relationships, Finn can't fully escape being Finn the human, legendary hero. The role follows him everywhere, creating a barrier between who he is and how people see him. The weight of being the only one who can solve certain problems creates a unique form of isolation. When there's a crisis in Ooo, people look to Finn. When a monster threatens a kingdom, Finn is called. When someone needs rescue, Finn responds. This constant expectation means Finn can never truly rest, never fully trust that others will handle things, never believe that the world can function without his intervention. The burden of being indispensable is also the burden of being trapped, unable to step away, because stepping away means people might die. Steven's isolation is different, but equally profound. He's not the last of his kind. He's the only one of his kind. Half human, half gem, he exists in a liminal space between two worlds, fully belonging to neither. The crystal gems love him, but they're processing their relationship with Rose through him, seeing him through the lens of their grief and love for someone else. His human father and the humans of Beach City care about him, but they can't understand his gem nature, the responsibilities he carries, the literal alienness of half his existence. The episode Full Disclosure captures Steven's isolation perfectly. After nearly dying in space and experiencing multiple traumas, Steven tries to protect Connie by cutting off contact with her. His reasoning is heroic. He's dangerous, his life is dangerous, and people he loves get hurt. But the deeper truth is that Steven doesn't believe anyone can handle knowing what he's been through. He's convinced that sharing his burdens will damage others, so he must carry them alone. This is isolation, disguised as protection, loneliness framed as selflessness. Steven's role as mediator between humans and gems, Earth and Homeworld creates constant code switching that prevents him from being fully himself anywhere. With the crystal gems, he downplays his human vulnerabilities, trying to prove he's gem enough to belong. With his human friends and family, he minimizes the alien, dangerous aspects of his life, trying to be normal enough to fit in. He's always translating, always adjusting, always aware that no single group can understand his complete experience. The loneliness of carrying his mother's legacy manifests in Steven's inability to talk about Rose honestly. The crystal gems idealize her, making it impossible for Steven to express anger or confusion about her choices. Greg loved her deeply, seeing her through romantic nostalgia that leaves no room for Steven's complicated feelings. When Steven discovers Rose was Pink Diamond, when he learns about all her secrets and mistakes, he has no one to process this with. The truth is too complex, too damaging to others' memories, too tangled with his own identity. So he carries it alone, isolated by knowledge that would hurt the people he loves. The isolation intensifies as Steven's heroic accomplishments grow. He's the one who healed corruption, who reformed the diamonds, who ended the war, who created peace. These are cosmic achievements that no one in his life can fully comprehend. How do you have a normal conversation with school friends when you've recently restructured an intergalactic empire? How do you relate to people who worry about grades and social drama when you're processing the trauma of nearly dying to save the universe? Steven's heroism creates an experiential gap that makes ordinary relationships feel hollow. Both Finn and Steven experience the isolation of leadership without choosing leadership. They didn't campaign to be heroes, didn't seek positions of authority, but they're treated as leaders because of their actions and capabilities. This creates a lonely paradox. They're too important to be normal, too young to be comfortable with importance. They're surrounded by people but trapped in roles that prevent genuine connection, needed but not fully known, loved for what they do rather than who they are. The shows illustrate how heroic isolation compounds trauma. Without the ability to process experiences with others who understand, trauma becomes internalized, distorted, magnified. Finn can't talk about the weight of being humanity's last representative because no one else carries that burden. Steven can't discuss the horror of having his mother inside him because the concept is too alien, too specific to his unique existence. They're isolated not just by circumstance, but by the impossibility of explaining their experiences to anyone who hasn't lived them. This isolation also prevents them from receiving the support they desperately need. Finn needs someone to tell him his worth isn't conditional on heroism, but everyone in his life benefits from his heroic identity. Steven needs someone to tell him he's not responsible for his mother's mistakes, but everyone around him sees him as the solution to those mistakes. The very people who love them most are often the ones reinforcing the heroic expectations that isolate them. The tragedy is that both characters are desperate for connection while being trapped in roles that prevent it. Finn wants to be seen and loved as just Finn, but he's always Finn the human, the last of his kind, the legendary hero. Steven wants to be understood completely, but he's always Rose's son, the crystal gem's hope, humanity's bridge to the gem empire. Their heroic identities, which everyone celebrates and depends on, are also prisons that keep them locked away from the intimacy they need. The collapse of the heroic identity represents the most dangerous phase of heroism's cost. After years of building an entire sense of self around being the hero, around being the one who saves people, what happens when that identity becomes unsustainable? When the trauma accumulates to the point that you can't keep performing strength, when you've accomplished all your heroic goals and discover that success didn't heal you. Both Finn and Steven experience versions of this collapse, and both shows illustrate how the destruction of heroic identity creates a crisis that's more dangerous than any external threat they've faced. Finn's heroic identity begins cracking in subtle ways long before it fully collapses. Each romantic failure chips away at his belief that being a hero makes you worthy of love. Each impossible choice reveals that heroism doesn't provide moral clarity. Each physical injury demonstrates that heroic willpower can't overcome bodily limitations. These cracks accumulate slowly, and Finn patches them with renewed commitment to heroism, with doubling down on being Finn the human, with proving through action that he's still the hero everyone needs. The episode The Comet represents a moment when Finn could have abandoned his heroic identity entirely. The cosmic entity offers him transcendence, escape, freedom from being Finn the human with all its burdens. For a moment, Finn seriously considers it. He's tired. He's been hurt. He's carried so much for so long. The temptation to simply stop being himself, to dissolve into something greater that doesn't have to keep being a hero, is genuine. But he chooses to remain Finn, to continue carrying the burden, because he doesn't know who he would be without it. This choice reveals the trap of heroic identity. Finn can't abandon being a hero, not because others force him to continue, but because he's built his entire self around heroism. Without it, he's nothing. He has no other identity to fall back on, no sense of self separate from his heroic role. The choice to remain Finn the human isn't freely made. It's the choice of someone who's so thoroughly identified with their role that losing it feels like annihilation. Better to continue suffering as a hero than to face the void of not being one. As Finn ages into young adulthood, the sustainability of his heroic identity becomes increasingly questionable. He's accumulated trauma, physical disability, romantic failures, and existential confusion. He's achieved legendary status, but feels empty. He's saved countless lives, but can't save himself from the pain of simply existing. The heroic identity that worked when he was 12, when the world was simpler and he was more naive, no longer fits the complicated, traumatized person he's become. The introduction and destruction of Fern represents Finn's confrontation with what happens when heroic identity fails. Fern is literally Finn, but without the validation, without the legendary status, without the external reinforcement that sustains heroic identity. Fern tries desperately to be a hero, to earn the recognition that original Finn receives automatically, but he's always second best, always the copy, always not quite Finn enough. His corruption and eventual destruction show what could happen to Finn if the external validation disappeared, if the heroic identity collapsed without a replacement self to sustain him. Fern's final moments, where he sacrifices himself to help defeat Golb and then dies in Finn's arms, are devastating precisely because they represent Finn confronting his own potential collapse. Fern is what Finn could become if the heroic identity failed, corrupted, broken, ultimately destroyed by the impossibility of living up to heroic standards. Finn witnesses his own potential death through Fern, and the trauma of that witnessing is its own form of identity crisis. Steven's collapse is more dramatic and more complete because it happens after his heroic goals are achieved. In Steven Universe Future, we see a young man who has accomplished everything a hero is supposed to accomplish. He ended the war. He healed the corrupted gems. He reformed the diamonds. He created peace across the universe. By any standard, he succeeded at heroism, and his reward for this success is complete psychological breakdown because he built his entire identity around being needed, and now nobody needs him anymore. The crisis begins when Steven realizes he doesn't know who he is outside of being everyone's savior. The crystal gems are healing and don't need constant emotional support. The diamonds are reformed and managing their own growth. The corrupted gems are healed. Beach City is safe. For the first time in his life, Steven isn't urgently needed, and without that need, he has no idea who he's supposed to be. The heroic identity that sustained him, that gave him purpose and worth, is suddenly obsolete, and there's nothing underneath it. Steven's attempt to find a new identity fails repeatedly because he's been a hero for so long he doesn't know how to be anything else. He tries to pursue normal activities, normal relationships, normal teenage experiences. But normal feels wrong, feels insufficient, feels like wasting his potential. He's been saving the universe since he was a child. How is he supposed to care about school or ordinary friendships when he's done cosmic-level work? The identity crisis is compounded by the fact that he's accomplished more than most people accomplish in lifetimes, but he's still just a teenager who doesn't know what to do with himself. The physical manifestations of Steven's collapse reveal how thoroughly his identity crisis affects him. His body starts changing without his control, reflecting his internal state. He turns pink when stressed. He ages rapidly when anxious. His gem powers activate defensively in situations that aren't actually dangerous. His body is responding to the collapse of his heroic identity as if it's a physical threat, as if the destruction of who he thought he was is equivalent to the destruction of his actual body. The episode Growing Pains makes Steven's collapse clinical and undeniable. A doctor tells him his body is exhibiting signs of serious trauma, that his physical symptoms are real and dangerous. This medical validation of his suffering should be helpful, but it terrifies Steven because it means he can't just push through, can't just perform strength, can't use heroic willpower to overcome what's happening to him. The tools that worked for external threats don't work for internal collapse. Steven's growing aggression and anger in Steven Universe Future represent the return of suppressed emotions that the heroic identity required him to deny. Heroes are patient, understanding, compassionate. They don't get angry, don't lash out, don't express resentment. Steven has been suppressing his legitimate rage for years. Rage at his mother for her lies and abandonment, rage at the diamonds for hurting his family, rage at the crystal gems for depending on him, rage at everyone for treating him like he was stronger than he actually was. When the heroic identity collapses, the suppressed emotions emerge explosively. His transformation into a giant monster represents the complete destruction of his heroic identity and its replacement with what he fears he actually is. A monster, something destructive and dangerous, something that hurts people rather than heals them. This isn't possession by an external force. It's Steven's own internalized self-hatred manifesting physically. He believes he's a monster because he's failed to maintain the heroic identity, because he's feeling anger and pain instead of compassion and hope, because he can't keep being everyone's savior without destroying himself. The monster form is also Steven's body rebelling against the impossible standards of heroic identity. He's forced himself to be compassionate when he wanted to be angry, to be understanding when he wanted to blame, to be strong when he needed to be vulnerable. The monster is what happens when you suppress yourself for so long that the suppressed material erupts in uncontrollable ways. It's a nervous system breakdown, an identity crisis, and a physical transformation all at once. Both Finn and Steven's near collapses reveal a fundamental truth about heroic identity. It's unsustainable. You can maintain it for a while through willpower and external validation, but eventually, the gap between who you actually are and who you're performing being becomes too wide. The suppressed emotions demand expression. The unmet needs demand attention. The trauma demands processing. And when the heroic identity can no longer contain all of this, it shatters. The collapse is particularly dangerous because both characters have no practice being anything other than heroes. They haven't developed alternative identities, alternative sources of worth, alternative ways of relating to the world. When the heroic identity fails, there's nothing to fall back on. It's not just losing a role, it's losing their entire sense of self. The collapse threatens complete annihilation of identity, leaving them with the terrifying question, if I'm not a hero, who am I? The shows don't offer easy solutions to identity collapse. Finn doesn't wake up one day with a clear sense of non-heroic identity. Steven doesn't simply decide to stop being a hero and immediately know who to be instead. The reconstruction of self after heroic identity collapse is slow, painful, and incomplete. It requires grieving the heroic self, accepting that the person you were wasn't sustainable, and building something new without clear templates or guidance. What makes the collapse particularly tragic is that it was preventable. If Finn had been allowed to develop an identity beyond heroism, if Steven had been permitted to simply be a child before becoming a saviour, the collapse might not have happened. But by the time they're old enough to recognise the unsustainability of their heroic identities, they're too invested, too identified, too thoroughly shaped by heroism to easily become anything else. The collapse is the inevitable result of building an entire self on a foundation that can't support it indefinitely. The process of recovery from heroic trauma is fundamentally different from recovery from other forms of trauma. Traditional trauma recovery involves processing painful experiences, developing coping skills, and integrating traumatic memories into a coherent life narrative. But Finn and Steven face an additional challenge. They must recover while potentially still needing to be heroes, while others still depend on them, while the circumstances that created their trauma continue to exist. They can't simply leave the traumatic situation because the traumatic situation is their entire life. Finn's recovery happens gradually and incompletely across the series. He doesn't have a dramatic breakthrough or a clear healing arc. Instead, he slowly accumulates experiences that challenge his heroic conditioning, that teach him alternative ways of being, that allow glimpses of life beyond constant heroism. His relationship with Huntress Wizard, for instance, offers a model of connection that isn't based on rescue or protection, but on mutual respect and shared competence. She doesn't need him to be her hero, which paradoxically allows him to be more genuine with her. The episode 17 shows Finn beginning to question his heroic identity and what it's cost him. He's turning 17, officially becoming a young adult, and he's forced to confront what he's lost to heroism: normal adolescence, carefree relationships, identity exploration. The episode doesn't provide answers or solutions, but it creates space for Finn to acknowledge the cost, to admit that being a hero has meant not being other things. This acknowledgement is itself a form of recovery, a recognition that the heroic life isn't the only valid life. Finn's recovery is aided by the fact that the land of U gradually becomes safer, less dependent on a single hero. Other protectors emerge, kingdoms develop their own defences. The urgent, constant need for Finn's intervention decreases. This creates space for him to step back slightly, to be less urgently heroic, to explore who he might be beyond the constant crisis response. The external circumstances shift in ways that permit internal healing. However, Finn's recovery is complicated by the fact that he genuinely enjoys parts of heroism. He likes adventure, likes helping people, likes the sense of purpose that comes from fighting for good. Recovery for him isn't about abandoning heroism entirely, but about developing a relationship with it that's healthier, more bounded, more integrated with other aspects of self. He needs to learn to be a hero sometimes, rather than being a hero always, to make heroism a choice rather than an identity. The presence of the grass demon within Fern, and Fern's eventual death and rebirth as a tree, represents a form of symbolic healing for Finn. The corrupted version of himself is destroyed and transformed into something new, something that can grow and change. This doesn't erase the trauma of having a corrupted clone or the guilt of Fern's suffering, but it offers a metaphor for transformation. The broken parts of self can be composted into new growth rather than simply destroyed or suppressed. Steven's recovery is more explicit and dramatic because Steven Universe Future is specifically about the aftermath of heroism, about what happens to a child hero who succeeded at saving the world but destroyed himself in the process. His recovery begins with the terrifying acknowledgement that he needs help, that he can't fix himself the way he fixed everyone else, that the healing powers that worked on corrupted gems don't work on his own corrupted psyche. The intervention by the crystal gems and Connie after Steven transforms into a monster represents the crucial moment when Steven must accept care rather than provide it. He's literally too big, too out of control, too dangerous to maintain the heroic facade. He can't protect them, he can't heal them, he can't be strong for them. All he can do is be vulnerable, be broken, be the one who needs saving. This role reversal is terrifying for Steven because it violates everything his heroic identity was built on. The collective embrace that helps Steven transform back from monster form is significant because it's not a single hero saving him. It's everyone who loves him, surrounding him, holding him, absorbing his destructiveness with collective care. Steven learns that he doesn't have to be the lone hero who saves everyone. He can be part of a community where care flows in multiple directions, where strength is collective rather than individual, where needing help doesn't mean failing. Steven's decision to go to therapy represents a crucial step in recovery. He's acknowledging that his trauma is real, that he needs professional help, that healing is work he can't do alone. This is revolutionary for someone who has been everyone else's therapist, who has mediated everyone else's conflicts, who has healed everyone else's trauma. Accepting that he needs a therapist means accepting that he's not omnipotently capable of healing, that sometimes you need expertise and support beyond what you can provide yourself. The therapy sessions we glimpse in Steven Universe Future show Steven beginning the slow work of processing trauma. He's learning to identify his feelings, to recognize when his body is responding to past trauma rather than present danger, to develop coping mechanisms that don't involve suppression or transformation. This work is unglamorous and slow, a stark contrast to the dramatic, immediate results of his gem healing powers. Recovery from heroic trauma doesn't happen in moments of crystalline revelation. It happens in small increments across many sessions. Steven's recovery is also aided by physical distance from the sources of his trauma. He decides to leave Beach City, to travel, to experience life beyond the constant reminders of his heroic past. This geographical separation creates psychological space for him to discover who he might be when he's not surrounded by people who need him, when he's not constantly reminded of his role as saviour, when he can simply be Steven without the weight of Steven Universe. Both Finn and Steven's recoveries are incomplete and ongoing by the end of their respective series. They don't achieve perfect healing, don't fully resolve their trauma, don't completely reconstruct their identities. Instead, they're in process, moving toward health without having arrived at it. This incompleteness is realistic and important. Recovery from the kind of trauma they've experienced doesn't have a clear endpoint. It's a lifelong practice of self-awareness, boundary setting, and choosing health over heroic conditioning. The shows also illustrate that recovery requires support from others who are willing to change their relationship with you. The crystal gems must learn to stop depending on Steven as their emotional support. Jake must learn to challenge Finn's self-destructive heroism rather than enable it. Recovery can't happen in isolation because the trauma was relational, created, and sustained by dynamics with others. Healing requires those dynamics to shift, requires others to see you differently and treat you differently. Both characters must also grieve who they were as heroes. Recovery isn't just about healing trauma. It's about mourning the loss of the heroic identity, acknowledging what that identity provided even as you recognize its costs. Finn must grieve the simple certainty of being the hero, the clear sense of purpose, the identity that made sense even as it harmed him. Steven must grieve the feeling of being needed, of being important, of mattering in the specific way heroes matter. The most challenging aspect of recovery for both characters is learning to tolerate ordinariness. After saving the world, after legendary heroism, after cosmic-level accomplishments, how do you find meaning in normal life? How do you care about ordinary problems when you've solved extraordinary ones? Recovery requires developing the capacity to find value in small things, in quiet moments, in a life that's not constantly dramatic or heroic. Recovery also means developing the capacity to say no, to set boundaries, to prioritize yourself even when others need you. This is revolutionary for both Finn and Steven, who were trained from childhood to always say yes, to always help, to always put others first. Learning that no is a complete sentence, that you're allowed to protect your own well-being even when it disappoints others, that your needs matter as much as anyone else's needs. This is the work of recovery, and it's work that contradicts everything their heroic identities taught them. The cost of heroism extends beyond the individual heroes to the people who love them. Jake, the Crystal Gems, Connie, Greg, and countless others experience their own trauma from watching someone they love destroy themselves through heroism. They're caught in an impossible position. Supporting the hero means enabling their self-destruction, but refusing to support them means abandoning them when they're in danger. The collateral damage of heroism affects entire communities, creating ripples of trauma that extend far beyond the hero's own suffering. Jake's experience of watching Finn grow up as a hero represents a particular form of helpless witnessing. He loves Finn completely, would do anything for him, follows him into danger without hesitation. But Jake also watches Finn get hurt repeatedly, physically and emotionally, and can't protect him from the consequences of his own heroism. Jake is strong and capable, but he can't save Finn from himself, can't prevent the choices Finn makes that lead to suffering. The episode Sons of Mars reveals Jake's terror of losing Finn, his desperate need to protect his brother, even at the cost of his own life. When Finn is threatened, Jake offers to trade his life for Finn's, demonstrating the depth of his love and his fear. But this willingness to die for Finn also reveals the impossible position Jake occupies. He can't imagine life without Finn, can't accept Finn's death, would rather die himself than experience Finn's loss. The love is pure, but it's also a form of suffering. Jake's enabling of Finn's heroism comes from love, but contributes to Finn's trauma. He participates in adventures, validates Finn's heroic identity, rarely challenges Finn's self-destructive choices. This isn't malicious. It's the natural response of someone who loves a hero. You support them, you help them accomplish their goals, you validate their sense of purpose, but support without challenge allows the heroic self-destruction to continue unchecked. The crystal gems experience collective trauma from needing Steven while also loving him. They're processing their own grief and trauma from the war, from losing Rose, from thousands of years of conflict. Steven becomes their hope, their healing, their reason to believe things can be better. But he's also a child, someone they should be protecting rather than depending on. The conflict between needing him and wanting to protect him creates a constant tension that affects all of them. Garnet's future vision means she sees potential timelines where Steven is hurt, corrupted, or killed. She experiences the trauma of witnessing his suffering in futures that might not happen but feel real because of her abilities. She must make choices to prevent the worst timelines while knowing that every choice creates new branches, new possibilities for Steven to be harmed. She carries the weight of knowing dangers Steven doesn't know yet, of protecting him from futures he hasn't seen. Amethyst's relationship with Steven is complicated by her own issues with feeling defective and wrong. She sees Steven as proof that beings created wrong can still be valuable, can still be loved. But this means his well-being becomes tied to her self-worth in unhealthy ways. When Steven struggles, when he exhibits signs of being damaged or broken, it threatens Amethyst's narrative about her own worth. She needs him to be okay, so she can believe she's okay. Pearl's trauma from loving Rose and losing her manifests in her relationship with Steven. She sees Rose in him, grieves Rose through him, sometimes treats him as a continuation of Rose rather than his own person. When Steven is in danger, Pearl experiences it as losing Rose again, as failing to protect someone she loves for the second time. Her overprotectiveness comes from trauma, from the desperate need to not experience another devastating loss. Greg's position as Steven's father is particularly painful because he's aware he's not equipped to parent a half-gem child. He loves Steven desperately, wants to protect him, wants to give him a normal childhood. But he can't compete with gem crises, can't protect Steven from dangers he doesn't understand, can't provide the kind of support Steven needs when he's processing alien trauma. Greg experiences the helplessness of being a parent whose child faces threats the parent can't address. The episode Mr. Universe reveals Greg's own trauma and how it affects his parenting. Greg ran away from his own oppressive childhood, seeking freedom, and he tries to give Steven that same freedom. But freedom for a child with cosmic responsibilities isn't the same as freedom for a rebellious teenager. Greg's hands-off parenting, born from his own trauma and his desire to not be like his parents, means Steven doesn't receive the structure and protection a child needs. Greg's trauma inadvertently contributes to Steven's trauma. Connie experiences the trauma of loving someone who doesn't value their own life. She watches Steven throw himself into danger, sacrifice himself, prioritize everyone else's safety over his own. She loves him and wants to protect him, but he won't let her protect him because he's too busy protecting everyone else. The frustration and fear of loving someone self-destructive affects Connie deeply, creating anxiety about Steven's safety that she carries constantly. The episode where Connie trains with Pearl shows her taking action to address this fear. She learns to fight so she can protect Steven, so she doesn't have to be helpless while he's in danger. But this solution also reveals the cost. Connie, a child, is training for combat because the boy she loves is constantly in life-threatening situations. She's being shaped by Steven's heroism in ways that affect her own development and safety. The collective trauma extends to entire communities. Beach City has been attacked, corrupted, and endangered repeatedly because Steven lives there. The townspeople love Steven, appreciate what he does, but they've also experienced terror and trauma because of his presence. They're caught between gratitude for his protection and resentment for the danger he brings. This creates a complicated emotional landscape where they need him, but also suffer because of their need. The cost of loving a hero includes constant fear. When Finn goes on an adventure, Jake worries he won't come back. When Steven faces the diamonds, the crystal gems fear he'll be shattered. This chronic anxiety affects mental and physical health, creates hypervigilance, prevents the people who love heroes from experiencing security or peace. They're always waiting for the next crisis, always preparing for loss, always aware that the person they love is in constant danger. Loving a hero also means accepting that you're not their priority. Finn will always choose the crisis over personal time with Jake. Steven will always prioritize the cosmic emergency over dinner with Greg. This constant deprioritization, even when it's necessary and heroic, still hurts. The people who love heroes must accept that they'll always come second to the world that needs saving, and this acceptance requires suppressing legitimate needs for attention, time, and prioritization. The shows illustrate how heroism creates complicated grief. If Finn or Steven died while being heroic, the people who love them would experience grief compounded by pride, anger mixed with gratitude, loss complicated by the knowledge that the hero died doing what they believed was right. This complicated grief would be difficult to process because society celebrates heroic death, making it hard to feel angry at the hero for leaving, even though the anger is legitimate. The people who love heroes also experience guilt for their own needs. Jake feels guilty for wanting Finn to prioritize their friendship over heroic duty. The Crystal Gems feel guilty for depending on Steven. Connie feels guilty for wanting Steven to be safer, even though safety might mean people die. This guilt prevents them from expressing their needs, from setting boundaries, from demanding that the hero choose them sometimes. The hero's self-sacrifice is mirrored by their loved ones' suppression of legitimate needs. Recovery for the people who love heroes requires them to stop enabling heroic self-destruction, even when stopping feels like betrayal. It requires Jake to tell Finn, "I won't go with you on this adventure because it's suicide." It requires the Crystal Gems to tell Steven, "We'll figure this out without you. You need to rest." It requires Connie to say, "I love you, but I can't watch you destroy yourself." These boundaries are acts of love, but they feel like abandonment because heroes have been conditioned to interpret any limitation as betrayal. The question of whether heroism is worth its cost has no simple answer, and both Adventure Time and Steven Universe refuse to provide one. The shows acknowledge that Finn and Steven saved countless lives, prevented catastrophes, made the world genuinely better through their actions. Without their heroism, Oo would have fallen to the Lich. Without Steven, Earth would have been destroyed, and the Gem Empire would have continued its oppression. The heroism produced real, valuable results that can't be dismissed or minimized. But the shows also refuse to celebrate heroism without acknowledging what it cost. Finn's childhood was stolen. His body was damaged. His relationships were corrupted. His sense of self was built on an unsustainable foundation. Steven developed PTSD. His development was warped. He nearly destroyed himself trying to heal everyone else. The heroism that saved the world also destroyed the heroes, and the shows ask us to hold both truths simultaneously. The heroism was necessary and valuable, and the heroism was deeply harmful to the people who performed it. The episode Come Along With Me provides Adventure Time's meditation on whether heroism is worth it. The finale shows the land of Ooo saved once again, shows Finn and his friends celebrating victory, shows a future where life continues and flourishes because heroes fought for it. The people saved by heroism get to live, love, grow, experience joy. Their lives are possible because Finn accepted the costs of being a hero. From this perspective, the cost seems worth it because the alternative, the Lich winning, Ooo destroyed, everyone dead, is unthinkable. But the finale also shows Finn with his prosthetic arm, shows the scars and damage heroism has caused, shows a young man who has been shaped and warped by years of constant crisis. The joy of victory doesn't erase the cost. The lives saved don't undo the damage to the saviour. Finn's heroism was worth it for Ooo, but was it worth it for Finn? The show doesn't answer this question definitively because the answer depends on your values, on how you weigh individual well-being against collective survival. Steven Universe Future's answer to whether heroism is worth it is more complicated because Steven succeeded at his heroic goals and then nearly died from the trauma of that success. The universe is saved. The diamonds are reformed, the corrupted gems are healed. Everything Steven tried to accomplish, he accomplished. And his reward is a psychological breakdown that nearly kills him and everyone he loves. From this perspective, the cost seems too high because Steven achieved his goals and still couldn't achieve peace. The episode I Am My Monster forces everyone who benefited from Steven's heroism to confront what it cost him. The crystal gems, the diamonds, the people of Beach City, they all watch Steven transformed into a monster by the trauma of saving them. They must acknowledge that their safety came at the price of a child's mental health, that their healing required someone else to absorb all the pain. The collective benefit of Steven's heroism is undeniable, but so is the individual cost, and the show refuses to let us look away from either truth. The question of worth is further complicated by the fact that neither Finn nor Steven had real choice about their heroism. Finn was the last human in a post-apocalyptic world, given a sword and a destiny before he was old enough to refuse it. Steven was born with his mother's gemstone, born into a war, born with responsibilities he couldn't consent to. Asking whether their heroism was worth it implies they chose it, but they didn't choose. They were shaped into heroes by circumstances beyond their control, and they paid costs they never agreed to pay. If we ask, was it worth it from the perspective of the people saved, the answer is clearly yes. Every corrupted gem that Steven healed, every kingdom Finn saved, every crisis they prevented represents lives preserved, suffering prevented, futures made possible. Those people get to exist, get to experience joy and love and growth, because two children accepted unbearable costs. Their heroism created value that extends far beyond themselves. But if we ask, was it worth it from the perspective of child welfare, the answer is clearly no. Children should be protected, not weaponized. They should receive care, not provide it. They should be allowed to develop at their own pace without carrying adult responsibilities. From this perspective, Finn and Steven's heroism represents a failure of the adults and systems around them, a failure to protect children from burdens they should never have carried. The shows also question whether the heroism was necessary or whether it was the only option because other systems failed. Did U need a child hero, or did it need better governance, better defenses, better collective responses to threats? Did Earth need Steven to heal the gems and reform the diamonds? Or should the crystal gems have found other solutions that didn't require a child to perform emotional labor for tyrants? The heroism might have been necessary given the circumstances, but the circumstances themselves represent failures that created the need for child heroes. Both shows suggest that heroism is worth it when it's chosen freely, when it's bounded appropriately, when the hero receives adequate support and can sustain their well-being while helping others. Adult heroes who choose their path, who have support systems, who can set boundaries, might experience heroism as genuinely worthwhile. But child heroes who are shaped into heroism by circumstances, who receive inadequate support, who can't set boundaries, are experiencing exploitation dressed up as nobility. The question of worth also changes over time. In the moment of crisis, when the Lich is attacking or the diamonds are threatening Earth, Finn and Steven's heroism seems absolutely worth any cost because the alternative is death and destruction. But in the aftermath, when the crisis has passed and the heroes are left with trauma and damage, the cost seems unbearable. The worthiness of heroism depends on which moment you're evaluating and whether you're prioritizing immediate survival or long-term well-being. Neither show offers a clear verdict on whether heroism is worth its cost, because the answer is genuinely ambiguous. The heroism saved lives and created genuine good in the world. The heroism also damaged the heroes in ways that might never fully heal. Both things are true, and the shows trust their audience to sit with that ambiguity rather than demanding a clear moral. What the shows do suggest is that heroism should never be extracted from children without their informed consent, that the costs should be distributed more equitably across communities rather than falling entirely on individuals, and that heroes deserve support, care, and the right to step back when the cost becomes unsustainable. The heroism might be worth it if it's done differently, if it doesn't require child soldiers, if it includes rest and recovery, if it's truly chosen rather than imposed. The final answer might be that we're asking the wrong question. Instead of asking whether heroism is worth its cost, we should be asking how we can restructure society so that heroism isn't necessary, so that collective threats are addressed collectively, so that no individual, especially no child, has to carry the weight of everyone's survival. The heroism was worth it given the circumstances, but the circumstances themselves were unjust, and changing those circumstances is the real work that the shows point us toward. The legacy of heroism extends beyond Finn and Steven's individual lives to shape how we understand sacrifice, childhood, and responsibility. Both Adventure Time and Steven Universe present child heroes not as inspirational fantasies, but as cautionary tales about what happens when we place unbearable burdens on the young. They ask us to examine our cultural celebration of heroism and recognize the costs we ignore when we valorize self-sacrifice without questioning who's being asked to sacrifice and why. Finn's legacy in the land of U is complicated. He's genuinely legendary, genuinely loved, genuinely appreciated for all he's done. Future episodes and the distant future sequences show that Finn the human is remembered as a great hero, that stories about him persist, that his impact on U was profound and lasting. From this perspective, his life mattered enormously. He shaped history. He saved countless lives. He made the world better through his actions. But his personal legacy, the man he became, is shaped by trauma and sacrifice in ways that future stories might not capture. The legends might remember his victories without understanding his suffering. They might celebrate his heroism without acknowledging what it cost him to be heroic. Future generations might hear about Finn the human and feel inspired without recognizing that the real Finn was a traumatized young man who lost pieces of himself to the role he was expected to play. The episode Grayble's 1000+ shows a distant future where Finn's legacy has become mythology, where the real person has been transformed into story. This transformation is both tribute and erasure. Finn is remembered, but the complexity of who he was, the pain he carried, the costs he paid, these might be lost in the transformation from person to legend. His heroism is celebrated while his suffering is forgotten, creating a sanitized legacy that might inspire future children to pursue heroism without understanding its true cost. Steven's legacy is still being written as he leaves Beach City at the end of Steven Universe future. He's reformed the diamonds, healed the corrupted gems, created peace between Earth and Homeworld. His impact is cosmic in scale, affecting billions of lives across the universe. Future gems will live in a system that's more just, more compassionate, more individualized, because Steven fought for those changes. His heroism created structural transformation that will persist long after he's gone. But Steven's personal legacy is his own healing journey, his choice to prioritize his well-being, his decision to leave and discover who he is beyond his heroic role. This legacy is quieter, less dramatic, but potentially more important. Steven is modeling what it looks like to step back from heroism, to admit you need help, to prioritize recovery over continued sacrifice. This example might help future heroes understand that stepping back isn't failure, that healing is important work, that you can't save others if you're destroying yourself. The show's legacy in our culture is their willingness to examine heroism critically, while still honoring the genuine good that heroes create. They refuse the simple narrative where heroism is purely good or purely exploitative. Instead, they present heroism as complex, costly, necessary, and potentially harmful, all at once. This nuanced approach to heroism offers a model for how we might think about sacrifice, responsibility, and care in ways that honor both collective needs and individual well-being. Adventure Time's legacy includes its meditation on post-apocalyptic survival and how trauma is transmitted across generations. The Mushroom War destroyed civilization, and everyone living in Oo is dealing with that legacy. Finn represents the possibility of healing from inherited trauma, of building new meaning in the wreckage of old destruction. But he also represents how trauma shapes you even when you're trying to transcend it, how the past's violence echoes in the present even when you're trying to create something better. Steven Universe's legacy includes its exploration of imperial violence, inherited guilt, and restorative justice. Steven must address his mother's choices, his family's oppression, his people's violence. He chooses to pursue healing and transformation rather than revenge or punishment. This choice creates a legacy of reconciliation, but the show is careful to acknowledge that reconciliation requires work from everyone, not just the victims, and that some harm can't be fully repaired even with the best intentions. Both shows leave us with the question of what we owe child heroes. We celebrated them while they were saving us. We depended on them while they were sacrificing themselves. Do we owe them care, compensation, acknowledgement of cost? The shows suggest that heroism creates debts that can't be fully repaid, that the people saved by heroes have responsibilities to those heroes that extend beyond gratitude into actual support and systemic change. The legacy of Finn and Steven's stories is the possibility of different heroism. What if heroes were supported by robust systems rather than being isolated individuals? What if heroic work was distributed across many people rather than concentrated in one person? What if heroes were given rest, therapy, boundaries, and the right to refuse? What if we structured society so that heroism was less necessary because collective problems were addressed collectively? These questions point toward a future where heroism looks different, where it's less about individual sacrifice and more about collective action, where children are protected rather than deployed, where the costs of addressing threats are shared equitably rather than falling entirely on the most capable or most willing. This isn't a fantasy of a world without danger. It's a vision of a world where danger is met differently, where heroism doesn't require martyrdom. The personal legacy for Finn and Steven is the rest of their lives, the work of integrating their heroic pasts with their present selves, the ongoing journey of healing and growth. They're young men who have already accomplished more than most people accomplish in lifetimes. What do you do with the rest of your life after you've saved the world as a teenager? How do you find meaning in ordinary existence after extraordinary heroism? Both shows suggest that this work of integration, of building a life after heroism, of finding meaning in small things and ordinary relationships, is its own form of heroism. It's not dramatic. It won't be celebrated in legends, but learning to value yourself outside of what you can do for others, learning to accept care as well as provide it, learning to simply exist without constant crisis. This is heroic work of a different kind. The ultimate legacy of the cost of being a hero in Adventure Time and Steven Universe is the invitation to examine our relationship with heroism, sacrifice, and responsibility. We're asked to consider what we celebrate, what we ignore, what we demand from others, and what we might do differently. The shows don't provide simple answers because the questions are genuinely complex. But they invite us to sit with complexity, to honour both the value of heroism and its costs, to imagine systems where people can care for each other without destroying themselves in the process. In the end, Finn and Steven's stories are love letters to everyone who has carried more than they should have carried, who has sacrificed themselves for others, who has learned to be strong because they had no choice. The shows see them, acknowledge their pain, refuse to minimize their suffering, even while honoring their accomplishments. This acknowledgement itself is a form of care, a recognition that heroism is real and valuable and still shouldn't cost what it so often costs. The legacy we take from these stories is up to us. We can continue celebrating heroism without questioning its costs, continue demanding sacrifice from the capable and the young, continue valorizing self-destruction dressed as nobility. Or we can use these stories to imagine something better, a world where heroism is chosen freely, supported robustly, distributed equitably, and never again extracted from children who deserve protection rather than expectation. The cost of being a hero in Adventure Time and Steven Universe was too high. The question is whether we'll learn from that cost or continue demanding the same price from the next generation of heroes. The emotional devastation of impossible choices forms a through line in both Finn and Steven's heroic journeys. Heroes in traditional narratives face clear moral decisions: save the innocent, defeat the villain, protect the weak. But Adventure Time and Steven Universe present their young protagonists with situations where every option causes harm, where doing the right thing means accepting that someone will suffer, where heroism demands choosing between different forms of failure. These impossible choices leave psychological scars that never fully heal, creating a moral injury that compounds with each new dilemma. Finn's first major impossible choice comes in mortal folly and mortal recoil, when the Lich possesses Princess Bubblegum. To save Oo from the Lich, Finn must harm Princess Bubblegum's body, must treat someone he loves as an enemy, must prioritize the greater good over the individual he cares about most. He succeeds in stopping the Lich, but Princess Bubblegum is left damaged, partially corrupted, no longer entirely herself. Finn saved the world, but he couldn't save her completely. The victory is hollow because it required accepting partial loss of someone he loves. This pattern repeats throughout the series. Finn must choose between his heroic duty and his personal relationships so often that the choice stops feeling like a choice and starts feeling like inevitability. When he's with Flame Princess, he must choose between being honest about his feelings and maintaining peace between kingdoms. When he's searching for his father, he must choose between his personal need for answers and his responsibility to stop the Lich. When he's dealing with Fern, he must choose between loyalty to his grass clone and protecting everyone else from Fern's corruption. The episode The Comet presents Finn with perhaps his most philosophically complex choice. The comet offers him escape, transcendence, a way to leave behind all the pain and responsibility of being Finn the human. He could choose peace, choose to stop carrying the weight of heroism, choose to simply cease being the person everyone depends on. Instead, he chooses to return, to continue living, to keep being the hero Oo needs. This sounds triumphant until you realize what he's choosing. He's choosing continued suffering, continued responsibility, continued sacrifice. He's choosing to remain trapped in a role that's destroying him because others need him to be trapped. What makes this particularly devastating is that Finn frames it as a choice made freely. He isn't being forced to return. He's choosing it. But how free is a choice when it's made by someone who has been conditioned since childhood to believe their worth depends on their usefulness? How free is a choice when rejecting it means abandoning everyone who depends on you? Finn's choice to remain, Finn the human, isn't truly free. It's the choice of someone who has internalized the message that his needs matter less than everyone else's, that escaping his pain would be selfish, that he must continue suffering because others need him to. The impossible choices escalate as Finn ages and the stakes grow higher. In the stakes between saving individuals and saving populations, between honouring friendships and protecting kingdoms, between being true to himself and fulfilling heroic expectations, Finn learns that heroism often means choosing the lesser harm and living with the guilt of the harm you chose. He saves the Candy Kingdom, but can't save every candy person. He stops major threats, but can't prevent all suffering. Each choice is a small death, a piece of innocence lost, a moment where he learns that being a hero means accepting that you can't save everyone. Steven's impossible choices are even more psychologically complex, because his primary power is empathy, and his primary goal is healing everyone. Where Finn can sometimes solve problems through combat, through clear victories over clear villains, Steven must navigate situations where everyone has valid pain, where multiple people deserve healing, where choosing to help one person might mean failing another. His impossible choices aren't just tactical, they're moral, emotional, existential. The conflict between the crystal gems and Homeworld presents Steven with an impossible choice that defines his entire arc. The crystal gems fought a war for Earth's freedom, suffer trauma and loss, and have every right to their anger at Homeworld. But the gems on Homeworld are also suffering under the Diamond's tyranny. are also victims of a system they didn't create, are also deserving of compassion and change. Steven can't simply side with the crystal gems against Homeworld because he understands that the gems on Homeworld aren't all evil. But he also can't dismiss the crystal gems' pain and demand they forgive their oppressors. His choice to engage with the diamonds, to try to heal them rather than simply oppose them, is framed as compassionate. But it's also an impossible burden. Steven makes himself responsible for redeeming tyrants, for healing the people who hurt his family, for finding a path to peace that doesn't require anyone to suppress their legitimate anger and pain. He chooses to carry the emotional labor of reconciliation, absorbing everyone's trauma so that everyone else can move forward. This isn't a free choice. It's the choice of someone who has learned that his value lies in his ability to fix what others can't. The episode reunited forces Steven to choose between his own joy and everyone else's safety. It's his wedding, a moment that should be about celebration and happiness. But Homeworld attacks, and Steven must immediately shift from enjoying his own event to protecting everyone else. He doesn't get to have unmixed joy, doesn't get to experience celebration without crisis, doesn't get a single day where his needs take priority. The message is clear. Even on your wedding day, you're a hero first and a person second. Steven's choice to turn himself over to Homeworld in I Am My Mom is perhaps his most devastating, impossible decision. He believes he's protecting the earth and the crystal gems by sacrificing himself, by accepting blame for his mother's actions, by offering himself as Pink Diamond's replacement. This is framed as heroic, as the ultimate self-sacrifice, but it's also the choice of a child who has been taught that his life matters less than others' lives, that his safety is expendable, that his role is to absorb punishment meant for someone else. Steven chooses to be captured, potentially shattered, because he can't imagine a solution where he doesn't sacrifice himself. The impossible choice that breaks Steven is the one regarding the Diamond's redemption. Should he help them heal and change, even though they're responsible for genocide, corruption, and thousands of years of oppression? Should he maintain boundaries and refuse to take responsibility for their growth, even though he has the power to help them and their change could save countless lives? He chooses to help them, to be their therapist and guide, to facilitate their transformation. But this choice costs him his own healing, his own childhood, his own right to simply be angry at the people who hurt his family. Both Finn and Steven learn that heroic choices aren't between good and evil, but between different forms of harm. They learn that every decision leaves someone hurt, that every action has consequences they can't control, that being a hero means accepting that you'll always carry guilt for the harm you couldn't prevent. This moral injury accumulates over time, creating a psychological burden that traditional therapy can't address because it's not about irrational guilt. It's about rational guilt for real harm that resulted from their choices, even when those choices were the best options available. The shows don't offer easy redemption for these impossible choices. Finn doesn't get to save everyone and feel good about it. Steven doesn't get to heal everyone without cost. Instead, both characters carry the weight of every person they couldn't save, every friend they hurt, every choice that required accepting harm. This weight becomes part of their identity, shaping how they see themselves, how they interact with the world, how they understand morality. What makes this particularly cruel is that both Finn and Steven are perfectionists who hold themselves to impossible standards. They don't just want to make the best choice available. They want to make a choice where no one gets hurt, where everyone is saved, where heroism doesn't require accepting casualties, but reality doesn't offer those choices. Reality offers messy situations where someone will suffer regardless of what you choose, and both characters interpret their inability to find a perfect solution as personal failure rather than as a limitation of the situations they're facing. The impossible choices also create a spiral of increasing responsibility. Each time Finn or Steven successfully navigates a difficult decision, it proves they can handle difficult decisions, which means they're given more difficult decisions to handle. Their competence becomes a trap. If you can solve impossible problems, you become responsible for solving all impossible problems. If you can make hard choices that others can't make, you become the person who has to make those choices. Success at heroism doesn't lead to rest. It leads to harder heroism. Both characters also face the impossible choice of whether to continue being heroes at all. Should Finn keep throwing himself into danger when it's clear heroism is destroying him? Should Steven keep sacrificing his well-being to heal others? The right answer seems obvious from outside. They should step back, prioritize themselves, let others handle some of the burden. But from inside the heroic identity, stepping back feels like choosing to let people suffer, choosing to be selfish, choosing to betray everyone who depends on you. The choice between self-preservation and continued heroism is framed as a choice between selfishness and nobility, and both characters have been conditioned to choose nobility even when it kills them. The long-term psychological impact of these impossible choices manifests as a particular form of trauma. It's not just PTSD from dangerous experiences. It's moral injury from having to make choices that violate your values, from being forced into situations where every option is wrong, from carrying responsibility for harm you caused while trying to prevent greater harm. This type of trauma doesn't respond to simple reassurance because the guilt isn't irrational. Finn really did hurt people while trying to help them. Steven really did enable the Diamond's redemption at the cost of his own healing. The harm is real, even if the choices were the best available. The theft of childhood is perhaps the most pervasive cost of heroism in both Adventure Time and Steven Universe. Finn and Steven are robbed of developmental stages that most people take for granted. The freedom to be selfish, the permission to make mistakes without cosmic consequences, the safety to explore identity without the weight of others' survival, depending on your choices. They're forced into adult responsibilities before they develop adult capacities for processing trauma, making them children with adult burdens and no framework for carrying those burdens healthily. Finn's childhood is stolen so gradually that it's almost invisible. In early episodes, he's 12 years old and adventures feel like play. He and Jake run around having fun, treating danger as exciting rather than traumatic. But the responsibilities accumulate. Kingdoms begin depending on him. His reputation grows. The stakes of failure increase. By the time Finn realizes he's not playing adventure anymore, he's living it, it's too late to return to innocence. The transition from child playing hero to child actually being a hero happens without his conscious consent. The episode Too Young captures this theft beautifully. When Princess Bubblegum is temporarily de-aged to 13, she and Finn share a brief period of actual childhood, goofing off, being irresponsible, having fun without stakes. But this can only last as long as Princess Bubblegum remains 13. The moment she returns to her adult form, she must return to adult responsibilities. And Finn is left behind, still a child, but no longer allowed to act like one. The message is clear. Childhood is a luxury that heroes and rulers can't afford. Finn never gets the developmental space to be appropriately selfish. Healthy childhood includes a phase of egocentrism, of believing the world revolves around you, of prioritizing your own needs. This isn't a flaw. It's a necessary stage of developing a strong sense of self. But Finn skips this stage entirely. He's never allowed to be the center of his own story because his story is always about saving others. His needs are always secondary. His pain is always less important than the crisis he's managing. He develops a self that's entirely oriented toward others, with no core of healthy selfishness to balance against. The show illustrates how this affects Finn's relationships through his romantic failures. He doesn't know how to pursue his own happiness in relationships because he's been trained to sacrifice his happiness for others. With Princess Bubblegum, he accepts years of unrequited affection without demanding reciprocity because heroes are patient and selfless. With Flame Princess, he prioritizes what he thinks she needs over honest communication about his own needs. With Huntress Wizard, he struggles to even articulate what he wants from a relationship, because wanting things for himself feels foreign and wrong. Finn also misses crucial stages of moral development. Children learn about right and wrong through experimentation, through making mistakes in low-stakes situations, through gradual increases in responsibility. Finn doesn't get this. His moral education happens in life or death situations where mistakes mean people die. He learns about consequences, not through breaking a toy or hurting a friend's feelings, but through failing to save kingdoms. This creates a moral perfectionism that's psychologically devastating. He can't afford to be wrong because being wrong has catastrophic consequences. The absence of play in Finn's life becomes more apparent as the series progresses. Early adventures had elements of play, silly monsters, light-hearted rescues, fun with Jake, but as Finn ages and the show's tone darkens, even adventures that should be playful become weighed down by trauma and responsibility. He can't simply enjoy being strong or skilled because those abilities are immediately conscripted for heroic purposes. He can't explore the land of Ooh out of curiosity because exploration always leads to someone who needs rescuing. Steven's childhood is stolen even more explicitly. He's literally born into a war, born with a gemstone that makes him a target, born with responsibilities that predate his existence. From his first appearance, Steven is trying to earn his place among the crystal gems, trying to prove he's worthy of his mother's legacy, trying to be useful. The concept of childhood as a protected time of growth and play is foreign to him. He's a child soldier who doesn't even recognize that he's a child soldier because this has always been his life. The crystal gems love Steven, but inadvertently steal his childhood by needing him. Garnet, Amethyst, and Pearl are processing their own trauma, their own grief, their own complications, and Steven becomes their emotional support child. He learns early that his role is to make them feel better, to be cheerful and optimistic, to provide the hope and light they lost when they lost Rose. He's performing emotional labor that should be flowing in the opposite direction, caring for adults who should be caring for him. The episode Steven's Birthday confronts the theft of childhood directly. Steven tries to have a normal birthday party with his human friends, but he can't relate to their age-appropriate concerns and celebrations. He's simultaneously too young for his experiences and too old for his age. His body even shapeshifts, fluctuating between child and adult forms, physically manifesting the confusion about what developmental stage he occupies. He's 13, but he's been fighting for his life since he was young enough that he doesn't remember not fighting. Steven never gets the protection that children deserve. Children should be shielded from adult knowledge, from graphic violence, from existential threats. Steven witnesses shattering, experiences corruption, fights in life or death battles, and processes cosmic horrors before he's old enough to have developed healthy coping mechanisms. The adults in his life try to protect him, but they also need him, and need wins over protection every time. They can't afford to shield him because they require his powers, his emotional labour, his role as Rose's replacement. The developmental task of separation and individuation, of becoming your own person distinct from your parents, is nearly impossible for Steven. His mother is literally inside him, her gemstone embedded in his body. He can't rebel against her because she's dead. He can't reject her legacy because her legacy is part of his physical form. He can't even process his anger at her without feeling like he's attacking himself. The normal adolescent work of differentiating from parents while maintaining connection is foreclosed by the unique horror of his existence. Both Finn and Steven miss the crucial experience of being protected. Childhood should include knowing that adults will handle the big problems, that you're safe, that someone else is responsible for your survival. Instead, both boys learn early that they're responsible for others' survival, that safety is something they provide rather than receive, that protection flows outward from them rather than toward them. This reversal of care creates adults who don't know how to receive support because they've been giving it since before they understood what it was. The theft of childhood also means the theft of experimentation and identity exploration. Adolescence should be a time of trying on different identities, making mistakes, figuring out who you want to be. Finn can't do this because he's already Finn the human, legendary hero. That identity is set, expected, depended upon. Steven can't do this because he's Rose's son, the crystal gem's hope, the bridge between gem and human. Both characters are locked into identities before they're old enough to choose those identities consciously. The shows illustrate how stolen childhood creates adults with developmental gaps. Finn is incredibly mature in some ways, capable of handling crises that would break most adults. But he's also emotionally underdeveloped in ways that become apparent in his relationships and self-understanding. Steven is wise beyond his years about trauma and healing, but he's lost the ability to simply be a kid, to have fun without guilt, to prioritize himself without feeling selfish. They're simultaneously too adult and too childlike, missing the integrated development that comes from experiencing each stage fully. The long-term consequences of stolen childhood manifest in both characters' struggles with identity and purpose. If you've been a hero since you were old enough to remember, who are you when you're not being heroic? If your childhood was spent saving others, what happens when there's no one left to save? Both Finn and Steven face this question and struggle to answer it because they never developed an identity separate from their heroic roles. They don't know who they are outside of what they do. Perhaps most tragically, both characters don't even fully recognize what was stolen from them. They can't miss a childhood they never experienced. They can't grieve a developmental stage they don't know they should have had. The theft is so complete, so total, that it's invisible to them. They think their experiences are normal, that this is just what growing up is like, that everyone carries these burdens. They don't realize that most children get to be children, get to be protected rather than protective, get to develop at a pace that allows for integration rather than fragmentation. The performance of strength creates one of the most exhausting dimensions of heroic burden. Both Finn and Steven learn early that heroes aren't allowed to be weak, to struggle, to admit defeat. They must perform in vulnerability even when they're breaking inside, must project confidence even when they're terrified, must be the strong one, even when they desperately need someone to be strong for them. This constant performance is emotionally depleting, preventing genuine vulnerability and creating a disconnect between their internal experience and external presentation that becomes increasingly difficult to maintain. Finn's performance of strength begins with his understanding of what heroes are supposed to be. Heroes are brave. Heroes are confident. Heroes don't cry, don't show fear, don't admit when they're overwhelmed. In early episodes, Finn's strength isn't entirely performance. He genuinely feels confident and capable. But as he encounters situations that genuinely frighten him, that exceed his ability to handle, he learns to hide those feelings behind heroic bravado. The performance becomes necessary to maintain the identity everyone depends on. The episode Billy's Bucket List shows the cost of this performance. Finn is carrying out the final wishes of his hero, Billy, while processing the devastation of learning his father is Martin. He's heartbroken, confused, and fundamentally shaken, but he can't stop being Finn the human just because he's in pain. He has to keep adventuring, keep helping, keep being strong. The work of heroism continues regardless of his emotional state, and he must perform capability even when he feels broken. Finn's relationship with Jake occasionally allows him to drop the performance, to admit weakness, to be vulnerable. But even with Jake, Finn often maintains elements of the heroic facade. He downplays his pain, minimizes his struggles, recovers faster than he's actually recovering, because heroes bounce back. Jake loves him and would support him through genuine vulnerability, but Finn has internalized the belief that being weak, even with someone safe, is a failure of heroism. The performance of strength becomes particularly damaging when Finn is dealing with romantic rejection. He's supposed to be the hero who wins, who succeeds, who achieves his goals. But Princess Bubblegum doesn't love him romantically, and no amount of heroism will change that. This creates a crisis in Finn's performance. How do you maintain heroic strength when you're experiencing a hurt that heroism can't fix? He tries to perform being okay, being mature about rejection, moving on gracefully, but underneath he's devastated, and the gap between performance and reality creates psychological strain. The loss of his arm forces Finn to confront the limits of performed strength. He can't pretend the injury doesn't affect him because it's visibly, obviously affecting him. He can't perform his usual physical heroism because his body has changed. This should be an opportunity to admit vulnerability, to accept help, to acknowledge limitation. Instead, Finn frantically seeks solutions, the grass arm, various prosthetics, that will allow him to resume the performance of strength. He's more comfortable with a dangerous replacement arm than with admitting he needs accommodation. Steven's performance of strength takes a different form because his heroism is rooted in empathy and emotional labor rather than physical combat. He must perform emotional resilience, must always be the one who's okay so he can help others who aren't okay. He learns to suppress his own fear, sadness, and anger, because expressing those emotions might burden the crystal gems, might make him seem weak, might interfere with his role as everyone's emotional support. The episode, Mindful Education, reveals the cost of Steven's performed strength. He's been suppressing his trauma, pushing down his feelings about Bismuth, about his mother's lies, about all the terrifying things he's experienced. He performs being fine, being stable, being the Steven everyone needs. But the suppressed trauma manifests in fusion as Stevonnie, making it impossible to maintain the performance. His body literally won't let him keep pretending he's okay. Steven's performance includes emotional positivity that becomes increasingly difficult to maintain. He's supposed to be hopeful, optimistic, the one who believes in everyone's capacity for change. This is both genuine to his nature and a performance required by his role. When he's struggling with doubt, with cynicism, with the exhaustion of constant emotional labor, he must hide those feelings to maintain the hope that others depend on. His positivity becomes a service he provides rather than a feeling he genuinely experiences. The pressure to perform strength intensifies as Steven's accomplishments grow. He's the one who healed corruption, reformed the diamonds, created peace. These successes create expectations that he can handle anything, that he's invincible, that he doesn't need support. When he's actually struggling, actually overwhelmed, actually breaking, he can't admit it because everyone has seen him accomplish the impossible. If you can restructure an empire, surely you can handle your own emotions, right? Both Finn and Steven experience the exhaustion of constant performance. It's draining to maintain a facade, to monitor every expression and reaction, to ensure you're projecting strength even when you feel weak. This emotional labor is invisible to others because good performance looks effortless. When Finn seems confident, people assume he is confident. When Steven seems positive, people assume he's genuinely feeling positive. The performance is so effective that it prevents others from recognizing the need underneath. The performance of strength also prevents both characters from developing healthy coping mechanisms. If you're always performing being okay, you never learn how to actually be okay. You never develop skills for processing difficult emotions because you're too busy pretending those emotions don't exist. Finn and Steven become experts at suppression, at distraction, at pushing forward, but they never learn genuine emotional regulation because that would require admitting you have emotions that need regulating. The collapse of the performance is inevitable. You can't maintain a facade forever, especially when the gap between performance and reality grows too wide. Finn's performance cracks in moments of extreme stress, when his usual coping mechanisms fail. Steven's performance shatters in Steven Universe Future, when the accumulation of suppressed trauma becomes too much to contain. The collapse is often dramatic because it represents the failure of years of carefully maintained control. What makes the performance particularly tragic is that both characters aren't just performing for others, they're performing for themselves. They've internalized the heroic ideal so completely that they judge themselves by it. When Finn feels afraid, he doesn't just hide it from others, he's ashamed of it himself, seeing his fear as a failure. When Steven feels angry or resentful, he doesn't just suppress it for others' benefit, he's genuinely disturbed by these feelings because they contradict his self-image as someone who's understanding and compassionate. The performance creates a vicious cycle. The better you perform strength, the less support you receive because no one realizes you need it. The less support you receive, the more you must perform strength to maintain your role. The more you perform, the more exhausted you become. The more exhausted you become, the harder it is to maintain the performance. Eventually, something breaks, but by that point, you've lost the skills and relationships that could help you recover because you've spent so long pretending you didn't need help. Both shows illustrate how the performance of strength is ultimately unsustainable. Finn can't indefinitely pretend he's unaffected by trauma, loss, and rejection. Steven can't forever suppress his legitimate pain and anger to maintain everyone else's comfort. The performance might work in the short term, might get you through specific crises, but it's not a viable long-term strategy for managing the ongoing costs of heroism. Eventually, the real feelings demand attention, and the longer they've been suppressed, the more destructive their emergence becomes. The corruption of relationships represents one of the subtler but more pervasive costs of heroism. Both Finn and Steven struggle to maintain healthy connections because their heroic identities distort every interaction. They can't form relationships based on equality and mutual support because they're always the helper, the fixer, the strong one. They can't receive care without feeling like they're failing their role. They can't be vulnerable without experiencing it as weakness. The heroic identity that makes them valuable to others simultaneously makes genuine intimacy nearly impossible. Finn's romantic relationships are consistently destroyed by his heroic conditioning. His attraction to Princess Bubblegum is fundamentally rooted in the hero-princess dynamic. He saves her, she's grateful, and he interprets this gratitude as the foundation for romantic love. But Princess Bubblegum doesn't need a hero. She's capable, intelligent, and politically powerful. Finn's inability to see her outside the framework of rescue and protection means he can't engage with who she actually is. He's in love with a fantasy of helplessness that Bubblegum never embodied. When Finn does form a relationship with Flame Princess, he immediately tries to manage and control it through heroic intervention. He can't simply be her boyfriend. He must be her guide, her protector, her moral compass. When she struggles with her destructive nature, Finn sees it as a problem he needs to solve, rather than a complexity she needs to navigate herself. He manipulates situations, stages, conflicts, and ultimately violates her trust because he can't separate being in a relationship from being a hero within that relationship. The pattern continues with Huntress Wizard, one of Finn's healthiest romantic connections. What makes it healthier is that Huntress Wizard explicitly rejects the damsel role, maintains her independence, and refuses to let Finn position himself as her hero. But even this relationship struggles because Finn doesn't know how to be intimate without being heroic. When they decide to keep their relationship private and casual, it's partially because Finn can't integrate romance with his heroic identity in a sustainable way. Finn's friendship with Jake, while deep and genuine, is also affected by his heroic conditioning. Jake often serves as sidekick, supporter, and enabler of Finn's heroic adventures. Their relationship is built partially on shared adventure, on heroism as a bonding activity. This creates complications when Finn needs Jake to challenge his heroic self-destruction rather than participate in it. Jake loves Finn enough to follow him into danger, but does he love him enough to tell him to stop being a hero when heroism is destroying him? The episode The Pajama War reveals tensions in Finn and Jake's relationship that stem from Finn's heroic identity. When they're on opposite sides of a conflict, when their loyalties diverge, the foundation of their friendship is tested. They've spent so long being a heroic team that they struggle to navigate disagreement, to maintain connection when they're not united in heroic purpose. The relationship is strong enough to survive, but the episode reveals how heroism has shaped even this most fundamental bond. Steven's relationships are corrupted by his role as everyone's healer and emotional support. He can't simply be Garnet's friend because he's also the child she must protect, while also depending on him to heal corruption and provide hope. He can't simply be Amethyst's friend because she looks to him for validation and emotional support he's too young to healthily provide. He can't simply be Pearl's friend because she sees Rose in him, projects her unresolved grief onto him, and needs him to be both himself and a connection to someone she lost. His relationship with his father, Greg, is loving but complicated by role reversal. Greg tries to be a good father, but he's also processing his grief for Rose, his confusion about gem stuff, his sense of inadequacy compared to the crystal gems. Steven ends up parenting his parent, reassuring Greg, making Greg feel included, managing Greg's emotions about Rose and about Steven's increasingly dangerous life. The child is doing emotional labor for the adult because the child has been trained to do emotional labor for everyone. Steven's friendship with Connie is one of his healthiest relationships, but it's still affected by his heroic conditioning. He tries to protect her, tries to keep her safe, even when she wants to fight alongside him. The episode Full Disclosure shows Steven trying to end their friendship entirely to protect Connie from the danger his life represents. He can't conceive of a relationship where someone chooses to be in danger with him. He must either keep people safe by pushing them away, or feel guilty for exposing them to risk. When Connie trains to fight alongside him, Steven struggles with allowing her to be in danger. His instinct is to protect, to shield, to take the hits himself. The idea of partnership, of mutual protection, of letting someone he loves face danger, conflicts with his heroic conditioning. He intellectually understands that Connie deserves agency, but emotionally, he's programmed to sacrifice himself to keep others safe. This creates tension in their relationship, even though they love each other deeply. Steven's relationship with the Diamonds reveals the most disturbing corruption of connection through heroic identity. These are the beings who hurt his family, who created the system that traumatized everyone he loves, who represent everything the crystal gems fought against. But Steven makes himself responsible for healing them, for being their therapist, for facilitating their redemption. He can't maintain appropriate boundaries because his heroic identity demands he help everyone, even his family's abusers. This creates an impossible dynamic where Steven is simultaneously the Diamond's victim's son and their emotional support. He must manage their feelings, guide their growth, and provide the compassion they need to change, while also processing his own trauma related to their actions. The relationship can't be healthy because it's fundamentally unequal. The Diamonds need Steven's healing, and Steven believes providing that healing is his responsibility, so his needs become secondary to their transformation. Both Finn and Steven struggle with receiving care without guilt. When someone tries to help them, comfort them, or prioritize their needs, they experience it as role failure. Heroes give support. They don't receive it. When they do accept help, they feel like they're burdening others, failing to be strong, violating the heroic identity everyone depends on. This makes reciprocal care nearly impossible. Relationships become unidirectional, with Finn and Steven always giving and rarely receiving. The corruption of relationships also manifests in their inability to express needs directly. Asking for what you need requires acknowledging you have needs, and heroes aren't supposed to be needy. Both characters learn to suppress their desires, to make themselves small, to accept whatever others are willing to give without asking for more. This passive approach to relationships means they never learn to advocate for themselves, never develop the skills to communicate needs clearly, never experience the vulnerability of asking and the intimacy of receiving. The shows illustrate how heroic identity prevents genuine equality in relationships. Finn can't be equal to the people he saves. Steven can't be equal to the people he heals. There's always an implicit hierarchy where they're the capable ones, the strong ones, the ones who fix things. This hierarchy prevents the mutual vulnerability that intimacy requires. If you can't be weak with someone, if you can't need them as much as they need you, you can't achieve real intimacy. The long-term consequence is loneliness, even within relationships. Finn and Steven are surrounded by people who love them, but they remain fundamentally alone because they can't let those people see their full selves. They edit out the weakness, the need, the pain. They present only the heroic version, and that version receives love and admiration, but it's not really them. The real person, underneath the hero, the frightened child, the exhausted teenager, the broken young adult, remains unseen and unknown. The false promise of completion drives much of Finn and Steven's heroic compulsion. Both characters operate under the implicit belief that if they just accomplish enough, save enough people, fix enough problems, they'll finally be worthy, finally be complete, finally be able to rest. But heroism doesn't work that way. Each success creates new responsibilities. Each problem solved reveals 3 more problems. Each person saved introduces you to 10 more people who need saving. The finish line keeps moving, and the promise of completion is revealed as an illusion that keeps you running forever. Finn's search for his father represents his investment in the false promise of completion. He believes that finding his dad, understanding his origins, connecting with his human heritage will fill the void inside him, will make him feel whole and complete. He spends years wondering, searching, building fantasies about who his father might be and what reunion might mean. When he finally finds Martin, the promise shatters. His father is selfish, cowardly, and uninterested in being a father. The thing Finn thought would complete him doesn't exist. This revelation should free Finn from the search, but instead it creates a different incompletion. Now he knows his father and wishes he didn't. Now he has answers that are worse than questions. Now he must grieve not just his father's absence, but the fantasy of his father he'd been sustaining. The search for completion through paternal connection fails completely, leaving Finn with a new void where hope used to be. He learns that some forms of incompletion can't be fixed because the missing piece you're searching for doesn't exist. Finn's heroic accomplishments also promise completion that never arrives. He saves the Candy Kingdom, defeats the Lich, protects Ooh, becomes legendary. Each victory should make him feel more complete, more worthy, more secure in his identity. Instead, each victory just raises the stakes for the next challenge. Saving the kingdom once means you're responsible for saving it forever. Defeating the Lich once means you're the person everyone looks to when cosmic threats emerge. Success doesn't lead to rest. It leads to greater responsibility. The grass arm and later fern represent Finn's attempt to achieve completion through restoration. Losing his arm created an incompletion, a literal missing piece that Finn desperately wants to replace. The grass arm seems to solve this, making him whole again, restoring his heroic capability. But this completion is false because the grass arm has its own agenda, its own consciousness. When it becomes fern, Finn's attempt to complete himself creates a new person who suffers because of that attempt. The promise of completion through replacement fails catastrophically. Steven's investment in the false promise of completion centers on healing his mother's damage. He believes that if he can heal all the corrupted gems, reform the diamonds, create peace between Earth and Homeworld, he'll have justified his existence, will have made Rose's choice to become him worthwhile. Each corrupted gem healed should bring him closer to completion, to the moment when he can say, "I fixed everything Mom broke." But healing one gem reveals 10 more. Reforming one diamond reveals how much damage the system did. The work is never done. The revelation that Rose was Pink Diamond should complete Steven's understanding of his mother, should give him the full picture he's been missing. Instead, it creates new incompletions. Now he knows she was pink, but he doesn't understand why she made the choices she made. Now he has more information, but less comprehension. Each answer about Rose generates new questions, and the promise of understanding her completely, of finally knowing who his mother was and why she became him, recedes further with each revelation. Steven's attempt to heal everyone represents investment in completion through universal restoration. He believes that if everyone is healed, everyone is safe, everyone is happy, then he can stop, he can rest, he can finally prioritize himself. But this completion is impossible because new people are always entering his life with new traumas that need healing. The diamonds need healing. The corrupted gems need healing. The off-colors need healing. The people hurt by the diamonds need healing. The work of universal healing is infinite, and Steven has committed himself to infinity. The false promise of completion is particularly cruel because it prevents both characters from experiencing satisfaction in their accomplishments. Finn saves countless lives, but he can't feel proud because there are still people he couldn't save. Steven creates peace between Earth and Homeworld, but he can't celebrate because individuals are still suffering. The inability to recognize achievement as sufficient to say, "This is enough," keeps them perpetually striving toward a completeness that doesn't exist. Both shows reveal how the promise of completion is a moving target that sustains the heroic compulsion. If you believed heroism was infinite, that there would always be more work to do, you might stop, might set boundaries, might prioritize yourself. But if you believe completion is possible, that there's a finish line somewhere ahead, you keep running toward it. The promise keeps you trapped in the heroic role more effectively than force could, because you're choosing to continue, believing each new effort brings you closer to the rest you've been promised. The episode Change Your Mind should represent Steven's completion. He's reformed the diamonds, healed the corrupted gems, created peace. He's accomplished everything a hero is supposed to accomplish. But Steven Universe Future reveals that this completion was false. The external goals are achieved, but Steven himself isn't complete. He's broken, traumatized, and has no idea who he is outside of his heroic role. The promised rest never comes because the incompletion was internal all along, and no amount of external heroic achievement could fix it. Finn's completion should come when he defeats the Lich, saves Oo, grows up. But the finale reveals that adventure continues, that there's no clear endpoint, that life in Oo keeps presenting challenges. The heroic work is never finished. There's always another threat, another person who needs help, another crisis to manage. The promise of completion through defeating a final villain is revealed as fantasy. Evil isn't one entity you can defeat. It's a constant presence that requires constant opposition. Both characters eventually realize that they've been chasing an impossible promise, but this realization comes too late to prevent the damage. They've spent their childhoods and adolescences striving toward completion, sacrificing their well-being in pursuit of a finish line that doesn't exist. By the time they understand the promise was false, they've already internalized the patterns of self-sacrifice, already lost the developmental stages they spent running, already damaged themselves in ways that can't be undone. The false promise of completion also prevents both characters from living in the present. They're always oriented toward the future moment when they'll finally be done, finally be worthy, finally be complete. This future orientation means they can't enjoy current accomplishments, can't be present in current relationships, can't experience satisfaction in the moment. Life becomes an endless preparation for a rest that never comes, a constantly deferred present in service of an impossible future.